All right, after a piece of cake, my sugar, probably, whatever those levels are, is probably really high right now. So we're good. So today we're moving on with we're still on book one, but it's the second in C.S. Lewis's A Grief Observed. Grief is a deep and poignant distress caused by or as if by bereavement. Bereavement is defined as the state or fact of being bereaved or deprived of something or someone. Notice either definition from Merriam-Webster is a definition. In other words, a definition that's by nature not an answer, but another definition. Todd Bolsinger said, people do not resist change per se, people resist loss. You appear dangerous to people when you question their values, beliefs, or habits of a lifetime. You place yourself on the line when you tell people what they need to hear rather than what they want to hear. Although you may see with clarity and passion a promising future of progress and gain, people will see with equal passion the losses that you are asking them to sustain. Grief equals loss or perceived loss. A perceived loss, by the way, is a loss that is a loss, and yet you know it's going to lead to something else. Like I told you, when we traded a car in and one of my daughters was crying because we had to give up the old car and she hadn't yet learned to love the new car. Perceived loss is also a loss where it really isn't a loss at all. And sometimes all we're doing is channeling. We're taking something from over here in our life and we're placing it on whatever this item is. We're really not upset about this. We're really upset about that, but we're using this in order to channel our grief, our loss, our pain. Book one, The Locked Door and Empty House. C.S. Lewis says, the empty house. Meanwhile, where is God? This is one of the most disquieting symptoms of grief. Go to him when you need and is desperate when all other help is vain. And what do you find? A door slammed in your face and the sound of bolting and double bolting on the inside. After that silence, you may as well turn away. The longer you wait, the more emphatic the silence will become. There are no lights in the windows. It might be an empty house. Was it ever inhabited? It seemed so once, and the seeming was as strong as this. What can this mean? Why is he so present, a commander in our time of prosperity, and so very absent, a help in time of trouble? The silence of God. I want you to notice, you arrive at the house. You're going to be consoled. You see the door slam shut. You hear the lock being locked, and then a second lock being locked. And then you ask the question, was there anybody who ever actually lived here? In other words, this is what grief does. It actually causes us to deny that which we know is a fact. And in this case, we knew the house was there because we watched the door closed, we heard the door locked, we heard a second lock, and yet now we're even questioning whether anyone ever lived in the house. Is silence good or bad? When I am doing the confession up front, let's see how close you're paying attention and how good you are at determining something. When we're doing the confession and I say, let us confess our sins before God, how long do I wait before I say the next statement? Eight seconds. I always count to 8. Now, the reason I say that is for some who, if they, for lack of a better term, want to take it personally and they really do want to confess their sins, it's like, Pastor, I barely got 3 sins out and you're already, and others are like, this is like 3 hours. Silence can be good, it can be bad. The other day, when we were getting ready for Easter, all of a sudden we couldn't hear Lewis. And Isaac and Kayla and I, we all know what happens when you have a 1-year-old who's being quiet. They're either asleep or getting into something. And so this is when silence can be bad in a different way. But there are times when we need silence. There's times when we need to think through something. It's why sometimes we will go to the ocean, a park. We will go somewhere where we can simply, just for a moment, be still and let him know that we know he's God. When God is silent, it is because he is not speaking, or is it because he's using a different means of speaking? And this is one of the things I know, that sometimes when someone is silent, they are using the silence so that they can draw our attention to something else. And it's hard if we are so focused on the silence, we can't see or hear or understand that there's actually something else happening. Chapter 1, or book 1, part 9. Is God really like this? See, not that I think, in much danger of ceasing to believe in God. The real danger is of coming to believe such dreadful things about him. The conclusion I dread is not, so there's no God after all, but so this is what God's really like. Deceive yourself no longer. So C.S. Lewis, who, remember, was an atheist, comes to faith, becomes an amazing individual defending the faith. Now he suffers not his first loss, but his first inconceivable loss. And he says, I'm not going to not believe in God. I'm not going to revert to my atheism. See, he's one of the few people that can say this. He says, I'm not going to go back to being an atheist. He says, instead, what I'm worried about is that this description of God locking and bolting the door and casting me out, that's what I'm afraid that I'm going to believe and accept and come to know God as. And this is the hard part. If we always thought that someone was something and then we discover they are something different, that's one thing if they happen to be one of our heroes on social media or movies or TV or a government official. We can get over that. But when we discover that God is something very different, and our whole eternity, because all of a sudden, if you remember the book of Revelation, where it describes what heaven is going to be like, and we're looking so forward to it, and all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, because all of us have someone in our past that when mom and dad would say, we're going over to so-and-so's house, we were looking for any excuse not to go. I think I have the measles. I think I have the mumps. I think I'm going to throw up. Because when we were at their house, something made you uncomfortable. Maybe it's that they wouldn't let you touch anything. Maybe it was just the house itself. You didn't want to go. And if we get to heaven and it's not a place we want to be forever, and we're going to be there forever, this is a terrifying thought. That the very thing that we have been so looking forward to is now no longer a place of comfort, but a place of awkwardness and perhaps even pain. So why would so this is God be worse than there is no God at all? Well, we got to ask, what are our expectations of God? What does God owe us, and what do we owe God? How does this relationship, this bereath or this covenant work with God? What's God supposed to provide us with? What are we supposed to provide God with? And what are the balances when one of us fails with one of our obligations or promises? Book 1, chapter 11. Absent when we need him, present when we don't. Of course, it's easy enough to say that God seems absent at our greatest need because he is absent, non-existent. But then why does he seem so present when, to put it quite frankly, we don't ask for him? That's actually a good question. Is there truth there, or is it only our perception of our truth? So, Pon graciously treated me to the prayer breakfast down at the Hilton Hawaiian Village on Friday. And it was interesting because the primary speaker, by the way, was one who said, I didn't know God. My dad didn't know God. This event took place. He cried out to the God he didn't know, and he said, if you will answer me, then my daughter will serve you the rest of her life. And now she's a very famous individual and has this worldwide, fashion design corporation. And you look at that, and all along she kept tracing how God was with her and how God was the one who was responsible for everything that had led her to this point. Now, that's very different than someone whose whole life has been one of pain, loss, or just uncomfortableness. And yet they would tell you, I have been sustained through all of this by God. Charlie Sherholtz was a B-17 pilot, crashed in World War II, plane on fire. He went back in multiple times, carried individuals out. He was grossly disfigured because of the burns. And yet Charlie and Bertie would tell you that all through this, God had been their hope and stay, quoting the old hymn. They never expected for Charlie to suddenly, miraculously, no longer be disfigured. They never expected God to somehow remove all of the pain and the other things that kept him from living a full and complete life. They just expected God to give them everything they needed for every day. And when we look at these two stories, and we look at them and we say, both say that God is there for them, this one in success and this one in existence, we find ourselves saying, is it possible it's the same God? And what are the expectations that we have? Can God still be good when he hurts us so? This is the question that C.S. Lewis is asking. Can God still be good when he hurts us so? And this is a question, by the way, that first we have to determine that it's God who's hurting us. But secondly, and this is where we talked about the first week, that Bible verse, all things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. This is where that verse becomes annoying. Because God, I really don't want it to all work. I just want it to be good. I don't want to have to go through the thing. There is, I forget which one of the basketball players, it might have been Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, could have been Charles Barkley, but supposedly this person came up to them and asked for his autograph, and he said, you know, when I was a kid, I wanted to be just like you, and supposedly, and it sounds a little more like Charles Barkley, turned and said, no, you didn't, otherwise you would have been on the court 10 hours a day practicing like I was. And you look at that and you go, whoa, wait a minute, that's a harsh statement. But what Charles Barkley or whoever said it was trying to say was, if you want this, this is the price. And so if we want to be faithful followers of God, salvation is free, but Bonhoeffer would say there is a cost to discipleship. Psalm 30. David swings wildly within the same psalm. I will exalt you, O Lord, for you lifted me out of the depths and did not let my enemies gloat over me. O Lord, my God, I called you for help and you healed me. O Lord, you brought me up from the grave. You spared me from going down into the pit. Yay, God. Sing to the Lord, you saints of his. Praise his holy name, for his anger lasts only a moment, but his favor lasts a lifetime. Weeping may remain for a night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. When I felt secure, I said, I will never be shaken. Oh, the most I'm ever going to have to deal with is just a night of gloominess, but the next morning, all's going to be fine. Oh Lord, when you favored me, you made my mountain stand firm, and when you hid your face, I was dismayed. To you, O Lord, I called. To the Lord, I cried for mercy. What gain is there in my destruction? Am I going down into the pit? Will the dust praise you? Will it proclaim your faithfulness? Suddenly, David is now confronted with the fact that God may not rescue him. And so he's justifying God's rescue. He says, look, you know, if I'm in the pit, I can't praise you. and you want to be praised, and I want to praise you, but I can't praise you from there. So if you make me go to the pit, I'm not going to be able to praise you. This is like a little 6-year-old trying to negotiate with mom. Hear, O Lord, and be merciful to me, O Lord, be my help. You turned my wailing into dancing. You removed my sackcloth and clothed me with joy, that my heart may sing to you and not be silent. O Lord, my God, I will give you thanks forever. David was often like this in his Psalms. How long, O Lord, must I suffer? Oh, thank you, Lord, for saving me. And you would see this within the same psalm. It was going in and out. Sometimes it was all praise. Sometimes it was all doom and gloom. Sometimes it waffled back and forth. And you really had no idea where David was going and where he was going to wind up. We move on to book 2. Memories betrayed a cosmic sadist? Question mark. What is a memory? The other day, we were talking and I was mentioning something, and this young lady said, I remember that. We were talking about her birth, and she was positive that she remembered it. And the dad very gently said, honey, you can't remember it. And she says, no, 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 I remember it. What does she remember? The home videos. She does not remember the event. She was being born. But she remembers watching the videos. She remembers her parents telling her the stories. To her, it's as real as though she was there, which she was. But she's not remembering it from her perspective. She's remembering it from the perspective of others. 2 people witnessing the exact same thing. Because of who they are, slightly different experiences, different families, they see the exact same event differently. And so when they get if they get, asked to tell me what happened, they both saw it. They were both standing right next to each other. Now it's different, by the way, if I'm here and you're over there and the event takes place between us, because we actually have a different perspective. But if we are standing right next to each other, the perspective should be similar, and yet we could tell 2 different stories. Why? Because when we say, is it fact, fiction, or a little both, it really is. Now I'm going to ask you, what is your worst memory that you have of God and why? And I just want you to hold on to that. What is the absolute worst moment where you were so angry at God you could spit nails? And then I want you to say why you were angry. We're not going to say it out loud or anything. I just want you to hold on to that, because this is what C.S. Lewis is asking. What is the purpose of our pain? What is the purpose of our loss? What is the purpose of all the things that we've gone through and are going through? And are our memories of those things, can they be trusted? And when somebody comes along beside us and says, do you remember? Is their memory any better than ours? Oh, and by the way, even today, with video, can we actually trust the video? Because the video cannot convey the emotions, the fears, the joys. All it can do is it's an accurate moment recording, but can it actually say what happened and how? Book 2, chapter 6. It lives forever in my memory. What pitiable cant to say? She will live forever in my memory. Live. That is exactly what she won't do. You might as well think like that old Egyptians, that you can keep the dead by embalming them. Will nothing persuade us that they are gone? What's left? A corpse, a memory, and in some versions, a ghost. All mockeries or horrors. 3 more ways of spelling the word dead. It was H I loved. As if I wanted to fall in love with my memory of her, an image in my own mind, it would be sort of an adultery. When we are dealing with somebody who has the geniusness of a C.S. Lewis, instead of when you walk up and say, but you will always have Paris, quoting the old movie, and he says, yes, I will. But he says, my goal is not to keep her in my brain in some other fashion where I can control it, bring her into my dreams when I wish, and have her act accordingly, because it's not her. She is no longer here. And so what I'm looking for is for her to sit across the table from me, to enjoy breakfast together, to discuss, to go for a walk. And he says, to have her in my memory would not be her. It would be like committing adultery because it's not her. It would be the person that I fashioned. Because, of course, in our memories, we go one way or another often. We either increase their evilness if we were angry at them and we remember all the bad, or we get rid of all the bad and we only remember the good. And so we've actually turned them into a different person. And so C.S. Lewis says, when you're trying to comfort me by saying you'll always have Paris, you'll always have the memories, he says, that's not going to work for me. Chapter 2, Book 2, Chapter 13, The Consolations of Religion. Talk to me about the truth of religion, and I'll listen gladly. Talk to me about the duty of religion, I'll listen submissively. But don't come talking to me about the consolation of religion, or I shall suspect that you don't understand. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 30 to 14. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the Lord of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort that we ourselves have received from him, from God. How do you bring comfort? Can you? And where does it come from? And what are its limits? And this is what C.S. Lewis, he said, when you walk up and you say, your religion, your faith comforts you, it will, given the time. But the truth of the matter is, when we have suffered a loss, and we're not talking a tiny one, we're talking the loss of someone that we cared about, we're talking about the loss of our way of life, talking about the world as we knew it. This is not something that we can just walk up and say, everything's okay because you're a believer. Now, there are some people that they're okay with that. Yes, I understand, and I've moved on. But for many, bringing up their faith actually hurts because they assumed, even though they know better, they assumed that their faith would have prevented whatever loss that they have gone through. Because I love God and God loves me, bad things aren't going to happen. See, we may say that we don't believe in health and wealth gospel as Lutherans, but the truth of the matter is we do. God, if I do this, I had graduated from high school. I had attended my first year and my second year at Seward, but I kept running out of money because I was putting myself through college. And so every time I ran out of money, I would go back to Denver. I would go back to work at the gas station I worked at. And then I would save up enough money and I would go back to school for a semester, sometimes two. And then I would run out of money. This is why it took me 7 years to get through college. So my grandfather had had his first heart attack when I was in high school, had a second heart attack when I was in early college. And then it was 1983. It was just a few months before Nancy and I were going to get married. And my grandfather had a heart attack. And he was in a coma in the hospital. And I went to visit him, and I was sitting there, and the guy was running the brain scan, the EEG, and I, for lack of a better term, was talking out loud when I just said, God, I want you to bring Grandpa back. And this tech, who, by the way, was not trying to be mean, nor was he trying to be anything other than what he was, he simply said, Your grandfather has no brain waves. If he lives, he's going to be a vegetable. And I didn't want to deal with that. And I wasn't angry at him for saying it because I watched the line and there were very, very minimal brain activity with my grandpa. But you see, here was the problem. I was asking God to restore and bring my grandpa back. The problem was that what I really wanted was for grandpa to be back to the grandpa I knew when I was younger. And the grandpa that I would have gotten back would not have been that. And this is one of those things where when we start asking for it, we're like, God, when I say I want this, what I'm really saying is, fix it for me. I want everything to be back to when I was 9 years old and I remember this day. That's how I want my life to be, and I'm expecting you to put it all back right. And so when C.S. Lewis is asking the question, he says, if you think your faith is going to make your life perfect, you haven't read Jesus. When is it too soon to talk of comfort and peace after someone or something we love dies? How long is the grieving process? So I went to some experts. They say 6 months, up to a year. It's considered normal. Beyond that, there's concerns for health, both physically as well as emotionally and spiritually. There is no such thing as normal grieving. No two people are going to grieve exactly the same, nor are two people going to have the same length of grieving. It really is personal. But there should be some sort of progress. And by the way, this doesn't mean that you're always moving forward, because you take 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, sometimes 5 steps back, then 6 steps forward, then 2 steps back. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they suffered a loss. And I just said, I haven't seen you since your son died. And I just want you to know that we keep praying. And he said, I appreciate that. It's been about 5 months now. And he said, today was especially hard. And he didn't go into why it was especially hard, but that particular day and something that happened or didn't happen made it especially hard after 5 months. And then he says, we were doing so well until. I followed up and they had a couple of good days, and so they were back to feeling a little bit better. But this is, you never get over it. You never replace that person. You never fill that gap. That hole in your life is there forever. But you learn ways of living despite the loss. And that's the other thing. We expect God, okay, God, tomorrow I want to wake up and I want everything, even though so-and-so or this has been taken from me, I want to go back. So I want tomorrow to everything be fine. God doesn't say that, nowhere. Book 2, chapter 18, in God's hands, because she is in God's hands. But if so, she was in God's hands all the time, and I have seen what they did to her here. Do they suddenly become gentler to us the moment we are out of the body? And if so, why? If God's goodness is inconsistent with hurting us, then either God is not good or there is no God. For in the only life we know, he hurt us beyond our worst fears and beyond all we can imagine. If it is consistent with hurting us, then he may hurt us after death as unendurably as before it. If God is responsible for our pain, if God is responsible for our loss, if we were in his hands in this world and he hurt us, then what makes us think that when we get to heaven, it's going to be any different or better? Now, this is a natural process. You'll notice that nowhere in here has Lewis talked about Satan or his demons being responsible for anything. God is responsible. I believe in God. God's the one who's failing me. Therefore, I'm going to put it all on God's shoulders. And so here he is. And this is what we do when we have rational logic. Okay, if she was in God's hands here and this happened to her, then what makes me think that now that she's in heaven, it's any better for her? This brings us back to what are our expectations of God in life? What promises were made to us about this life? And who is ultimately responsible for this life, specifically our life? Because if we can answer that, then chances are we'll know. I ordered something from a group, and I ordered two of them because I wanted to give one to my wife and one to one of my grandkids because I knew they were going to love this. And I ordered it. And next day, I got a thing that says it's been shipped and it was coming from China. And so it has to go through all this. And so all along the way, they kept saying back and forth, it kept saying, yep, it's here, it's here, it's here, it's cleared customs, it's here, it's here, it's here. And then literally a month ago, it made it to Alabama, where it has been sitting for a month. No future communication. So I contacted the company and they said, we will do our best to track it down. I said, thank you. Next day, it seems that they don't know what happened to it. We're going to ship you another one. Okay. Next day, oh, we are so sorry. We no longer manufacture that product. So therefore, we're refunding your money. And sure enough, I got my refund. Now, the reason I bring that up is because, to be honest, when I ordered this from the company that I ordered it from, I had no idea if they were a real company and they were going to do anything. When the next day they sent me a tracking thing, it was like, oh, okay. When I was tracking it, and by the way, I actually went on UPS, entered the number, and they said, yes, you have a package, and it's here, and it's here, and it's here, and it's here, it's here. And then it just decided to stay in Alabama. Evidently, Alabama is a nice place to retire, and it decided to retire there. And but all along, I knew what to expect. I also never thought, I was never counting on it because it was always, it's always one of those things. But I was able to track it. And to a point, I had some control over it. But I don't remember God or anybody ever making me a promise. Oh, my parents always said I could do anything and they would always be there for me. And, parents are really good about making all these promises. But I never remember actually signing a contract that says, this is what you get in life and these are your responsibilities. And when you sign your name on the dotted line, everything's going to be okay. I never remember signing that contract or even being offered one. And yet I still, in my brain, have expectations of the world, of this country, of this state, of this community, of myself, of my family, of my friends. I still have all these expectations, and yet I'm not sure how often we've ever communicated those expectations. And I'm also not sure how we resolve the expectations when they fail. Either we fail or they fail. Book 2, chapter 19, God forgive God. Sometimes it's hard not to say, God forgive God. Sometimes it's hard to say so much, but if our faith is true, God didn't. Instead of forgiving God, he crucified God. In other words, God the Father crucified God the Son. Here's our theology of the cross, something, by the way, that C.S. Lewis would have appreciated. See, God did not hold back, allowing his own Son to be crucified to save his people. And by the way, before we look at this and think that somehow Jesus was an unwitting character in this, Jesus is the one long before he gets crucified that he turns to his disciples and says, no one can take my life from me. I give it freely and willingly. He tells Pilate, for this reason I came into the world. And yet we see this, and all of a sudden this is where we have to start saying, wait a minute. God saw that we were going to suffer. God saw that we were going to be in pain. God saw that we were going to have loss. And yet this same God who we're angry at was willing to surrender and sacrifice his own Son in order to save us. Now, this brings up a million questions, such as why couldn't God just snap his fingers? Why did the cross and the empty tomb and all that have to take place? Couldn't God have just fixed everything? That's a discussion for another day because there is no end to it. It will go on forever. But all of a sudden, if we realize how seriously God took our problem, we now have to struggle with it. Because if God suffered, then it means that God understands suffering. and he understands us. So when we suffer a loss, do we want somebody to sit with us? Do we want someone to do something? And by the way, if we want them to do something, what exactly would we have them do? And this is individual. Some people just want to be alone. Some people want to be in a crowd. Some people just want to be with a few people that they know and they can trust. But when we suffer a loss, we struggle with it because we have to ask exactly how do we want others to handle this loss? Because some people hold up their hands and say, I don't want to talk about it. Others want to literally pour it out over and over and over again, where you hear the story 25 times and people start avoiding you because they know you're just going to keep telling them the same story. To each of us, it is unique. But we have to ask, did we want God to come and sit with us, or did we want God to do something? If we wanted God to do something, what did we expect God to do? If, and we go back to Mary and Martha and Lazarus. If you had been here, Jesus, he would not have died. A few minutes later, Mary comes out. Jesus, if you had been here, he would not have died. And Jesus says, whatever you ask. Yeah. We know he's going to rise at the resurrection, Jesus. That is not doing us any good right here and right now. And part of the problem with this story is Jesus actually brings Lazarus out of the tomb. So Mary and Martha and the community get Lazarus back. And we're looking at it, we're going, okay, God, if that wasn't that hard for you, couldn't you do it for me? The problem is that that's where the story of Lazarus more or less ends. But a little while later, and none of us know exactly when, Lazarus died again of something else. So did Mary and Martha. In other words, he only got brought back so he could die again of something else. Jesus says, I'm going to go through whatever I'm going to go through and do whatever I'm going to do so that when you die, you never, ever, ever have to die again. And nothing will be able to touch you. The moment you die, you're done. You're freed from that. This cocoon that we're in is gone, and you are now holy and perfect forever. Book 2, chapter 26, False Hopes. What chokes every prayer and every hope is the memory of all the prayers H and I offered and all the false hopes we had. Not hopes raised merely by our own wishful thinking, hopes encouraged, even forced upon us by false diagnoses, by x-ray photographs, by strange remissions, by one temporary recovery that might have ranked as a miracle. Step by step, we were led up the garden path. Time after time, when he seemed most gracious, he was really preparing the next torture. This is C.S. Lewis in his grief pouring out. He's looking back and saying, God, why did you take us up here? And we'll use transfiguration. Why did you take us to the mountaintop? Only so that we could go down into the valley and watch you die. So what exactly is hope? Psalm 39:7 says, but now, Lord, what do I look for? My hope is in you. Save me from all my transgressions. Do not make me the scorn of fools. Romans 8:24, for in this hope we were saved. But hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what he already has? Is God a cosmic sadist? Well, I wrote that last night. It was rather a yell rather than a thought. Let me try it over again. Is it rational to believe in a bad God? Anyway, in a God so bad as all that. The cosmic sadist, the spiteful imbecile. I love the fact that C.S. Lewis is willing to admit, this was my thought last night. Well, actually, I was busy yelling. About 30 years ago, at the same time, this congregation had a high school student with a brain tumor and a junior high school student with leukemia, both up at Tripler. And so every time I would go to Tripler, I would go see both of them, and I could almost guarantee that they were there because they were in the hospital more than they were home. And I came back one night, traffic was bad, so I came into the sanctuary, thought I was just going to talk with God for a little while, and I wound up yelling at him. What I didn't know was one of our members was going to walk in, because back then we only had big wooden doors and they weren't locked, and unless we went out because you had to deadbolt them. And I was not screaming, but I was talking very animatedly and very loudly at God. And all of a sudden, from the back of the sanctuary, I hear, and I turn around and he says, "Do you always talk to God like that?" And I said, "More often than you probably realize." And he says, "Well, I came because I'm having a struggle with my family." I said, "Well, let's sit down." He says, "What do I do?" And when we finished it all, I said, "Go yell at God." And he says, "No, I was told I was not allowed to yell at God." I said, "Why not?" I said, "Jesus yelled at God." He goes, "What? My God, why have you forsaken me?" I said, "David was always yelling at God. So were all the prophets." Because I said, when you're yelling at someone and you keep yelling at them, the day comes when either you're hoarse because you've yelled so much, or you're tired and you can't yell anymore, and you take a deep breath. So at the youth gathering this summer, the team that I'm with, we are going to be handling all of the anxiety attacks, panic attacks, and other emotional crises that are going to be taking place at the Dome. And one of the things is we take these little windmills with us. Bless you. And the reason we take the little windmills with us is because when someone is having a panic attack, they forget to breathe. And so we hand them this and we say, "Blow." And they're like, I said, "Blow." And finally, they realize that in order to make the pinwheel go, they have to go. And the moment they take that breath, something shifts in their brain and they go, "Oh." They're still blubbering, they're still crying, but now they're breathing again. Now that they're breathing again, and by the way, as much as I'd love to tell you I'm a genius and figure this out, I've got a bunch of people that are 20 times smarter than I am. They taught me this. I also take little fidget items because when somebody is just crying, you hand it to them, and next thing you know, they're playing with it. And it's not that they forget what they're doing or what they're suffering through, but they start playing with it, and suddenly they have something else besides themselves to focus on. When you're yelling at God and you finally have to stop yelling for some reason, that's when the back of your brain says, you share in this responsibility, or, it really wasn't God's fault, or, you're really actually pretty much being a little just resentful and uncaring. This is why David does that, because at some point he realizes God actually did this, God actually did that. Yeah, God did this. And we begin to realize, and we take that deep breath. And once we take that deep breath, we move on to the very next thing. This is what's happening because C.S. Lewis is suddenly saying, is God really an imbecile? Is he really a cosmic sadist? Book 2, chapter 31, The Drill. Why do I make room in my mind for such filth and nonsense? Do I hope that if feeling disguises itself as thought, I shall feel less? Aren't all these notes the senseless writhings of a man who won't accept the fact that there is nothing we can do with suffering except to suffer it? Who still thinks there is some device, if only he could find it, which will make pain not be pain? It doesn't really matter whether you grip the arms of the dentist chair or let your hands lie in your lap. The drill drills on. How many of you love to go to the dentist? How many of you love that sound? How many of you, when you hear a sound like it, cringe, even if you're nowhere near the dentist's office? Ecclesiastes 1:3-4. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What does man gain from all his labor at which he toils under the sun? The teacher continues. I, the teacher, was the king over Israel and Jerusalem. I devoted myself to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under heaven. What a heavy burden God has laid on men. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. What is twisted cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. If life is meaningless, not meaningly, whose fault is it? If the life that we lost is meaningful, did death take it away? And what is the next step? We don't want the person living in our mind because, as he said, that's almost like adultery because we've created a new figment of our imagination where we put a perfect person to live in our mind. But if life is meaningless, whose fault is that? And if the life or whatever we lost had meaning, did death actually take it away? And that's where we're going to stop this week. And next week we move on because C.S. Lewis is beginning to make the turning point because he has used his rational, brilliant mind to ask not just his questions, but the questions that everyone in the world has asked. And now as he slips in, he starts to realize, maybe I've been a bit unfair with God. God was unfair with me. He took something I love, but maybe I've been a bit unfair with him. Go in peace, serve the Lord in gladness, and have an absolutely amazing week.